everybody, my name is Torimo Jori. Welcome to this Toreview for Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation, episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. I watched these live on stream and then gave myself some time to think about what I watched. Now, Mushoku Tensei is a very controversial series, and it's easy to see why. Throughout my experience of watching these episodes, there were many times where I was grossed out by the actions of the main character. While I still feel that way after thinking about it, I definitely overlooked some other quite interesting aspects of the series, which I'll attempt to compensate for in this Toreview. Here's what you should expect in this series. I will do chunks of 4 episodes for each review, except OVAs, which I'll likely bundle into another chunk. I will recap the episode, then give my thoughts on it, then give my overall thoughts on the chunk/series overall so far. Note that this is only a review of the anime, and I will not be considering any light novel, web novel, or manga material. I am watching the Japanese dub with English subs. We're streaming this every Monday, and don't be fooled by the title, it's just trendy to do. Concerning the recaps, usually a lot of separate events happen in these episodes, so the recaps will be fairly lengthy. Feel free to skip them if you want my thoughts in the episode. Note that I'm not offended or you can't deal with hard subjects, that just ain't how it is. Alright, let's get into Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation, episodes 1 through 4. Let's go! This is your warning for spoilers. Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation is quite the interesting series, and you should absolutely experience it before watching this video. As well, this is a reminder that these are my opinions, and I'm simply stating what I feel and think about the series. If you disagree with any of my opinions, give me a comment down below, specifically saying what you think I could do to improve my comprehension and understanding of the series. However, don't spoil me, please. This is my first time watching the series, and I want to go through it chunk by chunk. Without further ado, into this Toreview. Episode 1 of Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation. We start off with our protagonist, struck by truck-goon, dying out on the operating table. While thinking about his Hiki life, he passes away and immediately into another world. He's greeted by his parents, Paul and Zenith. And our protagonist, Rudius, immediately begins to perform lecherous deeds around the household, relating to Zenith, his mother, and Lilia, the maid. His father, Paul, is gifted in swordplay, and his mother is a magic caster, which he finds out when he heals his poo-poos. Rudius comes to the conclusion that he is in another world of sword and sorcery. He dedicates himself to learning the secrets of magic from the few books he discovers in the chests of their attic. Harry Potter ain't got nothing on him. He teaches himself to read based off the few books he has to understand the magic system. He chants an incantation for the spell Water Bell, and it appears before him. He then figures out that he doesn't have to use an incantation, as he just thinks the words and the spell casts. He then runs out of mana and splashes his pants. To increase his mana, he constantly casts spells day after day. He learns more and more about magic, decrypting the system which spells are cast, while his parents get it on. While his father is practicing swordplay, Rudius nails him in the head with a water ball. He figures out the incantation, as the order for water ball goes create, set size, set firing speed, and activate. He tries a higher tier of magic for the first time, Splash Flow, and makes a massive hole in the house. In this manner, his parents find out that he is capable of practicing magic and go to hire a magic tutor for him. These scoops got money. The magic tutor who comes in is Roxy, a blue-haired caster who doesn't seem to believe in Rudius' prowess. And it looks like a middle schooler. Roxy explains the types of magic, as well as the tiers of power each magic spell has. Roxy demonstrates a water ball spell, chopping down a tree and healing it back to the base in short order. Rudius performs a lecherous action again and explains to Roxy that he doesn't have to use an incantation to cast a spell, which she finds incredible enough to make him his protege. The family welcomes Roxy into their home and feast, and with the declaration from Rudius that he will get serious about living in this do-over, the episode ends. Now, onto my thoughts on the matter. In the first episode of Mushoku Tensei, there is a lot to talk about. We get introduced to our main character, and because we don't get his name before his death, to us, he is Rudius. The very premise of this show is a degenerate hikikomori person who gets a second chance at life through being reincarnated into this world of sword and sorcery. We see that despite being in the body of a child, he fully maintains his memories, maturity, and personality from his past life. Then we meet Paul and Zenith, Rudius' parents. Both seem to be former adventurers, retired at a fairly young age. Paul being somewhat of a sword saint, and Zenith being the cleric type. Zenith seems to be ecstatic that her child is a magic user, and a proficient one at such a young age at that. That probably serves as a good segue into talking about the magic system. Even of the little we've seen so far, it is quite interesting. When it comes to casting at someone like this, think of it in coding terms. Each spell serves as a function, where the user can decide the variables input into that function. While we don't get it in this episode, it is worth noting that each individual spell has its own set of parameters and variables going into the function of the spell. I find the magic system incredibly interesting, and hope they give it the explanations it deserves in the following episodes. As well in this episode, we meet Roxy, Rudius' magic tutor. She seems to be somewhat of a pro, and it's weird that she would come out to the sticks, as Rudius calls it, to teach him. She switches between dismissive and flustered through her interaction with Rudius, ultimately settling into the teacher-student relationship. I should probably mention something that has so far gone somewhat minimized. Rudius is a degenerate. His lifetime of sloth and lechery has led him to view people in this world as much the same, even to the degree of seeing them along the lines of NPCs in a video game. In this matter, Rudius views people, especially women, as objects only for his pleasure. In his very first moments in this new world, Rudius attempts to reach for Zenith to satiate his lust. He puts panties on his face, and when Roxy comes to the Garrett household, he immediately ogles her, but, in his words, calls her a middle school lolly body, a bit of paraphrasing, as well as during their lesson. What should be known is that Rudius is not just an introvert, not just a socially awkward person. He is morally, socially, and psychologically a bad person. This story is supposed to serve as somewhat of a second chance for him to demonstrate that if he was placed into different circumstances from his birth, he would not live this life as he did in his past. It can be difficult at times to remember that this is the story. Rudius does bad things, sometimes getting better, sometimes getting worse. It can be really difficult to bear those actions when he does them, as he occasionally made me shriek a little during my experience with this series. Well, this will get explored more as the series goes on, so let's hope it shows how Rudius gets better throughout these episodes. Anyways, those are my thoughts on this episode. Episode 2, Mushoku Tensei. Teacher. We start off this episode with a funeral for 2 people and a seat empty. We then transition to people coming to pass Rudius' home, seeing him doing something degenerate, and kicking him out onto the streets. He sees a truck careening out of control, and with his voice unable to speak up, pushes a group of teenagers out of the way of the oncoming vehicle. Back to the new world, Rudius is practicing his earth magic by creating small figurines. He finds Roxy in the hallway doing the 2-finger tango while listening to his parents get it on. Rudius is progressing in his magic learning, and listening to the history that Roxy tells him as well. Roxy informs him that she is a demon, and about a race of green-haired demons with red gems on their foreheads called Superza that once went on a genocidal rampage. I'm sure that'll never come up again. Rudius attempts to flirt with Roxy to lessen result. He progresses in his magic learning, mastering different spells. At the same time, failing a bit with his sword practice. We see Rudius suffering trauma from his past life when seeing 2 boys playing outside his homestead. Roxy's homeland? More like barren land. Oh! As well, she details the Renewal Magic Academy, an important step on the route to learning magic. Roxy tries to do a spell without an incantation, but cannot. Rather than annual birthday celebrations, this world has quinquennial celebrations for birthdays. For his first birthday, Rudius receives a sword from Pa, a book from Zenith, and a magic stone from Roxy. Believing that she had nothing more to teach him, Roxy decided to hold his graduation ceremony the next day. Rudius remembers his past life, the torture he had endured at the hands of others, and dreads the next day. Fearful, Roxy forces him onto a horse, forcing him to leave his homestead. While they go, however, Rudius gradually realizes that these people aren't mocking him or anything of the sort. They just see him as he is. For his final exam, Roxy casts Divine Level Water Magic, Cumulonimbus, a spell cast to summon a maelstrom. Lightning strikes their horse, and Roxy heals with magic. While Roxy protects their horse from further harm, Rudius casts Cumulonimbus and successfully passes his final exam, making Rudius a sacred level mage. His family tries to convince Roxy to stay, but it's time for her to go. Roxy gifts Rudius with a charm from her hometown in the form of a pendant and leaves. With a newfound respect in his heart, it is then revealed that he had stolen a pair of Roxy's panties. And the episode ends. Now, on to my thoughts on the matter. In the second episode of Mushoku Tensei, the second half of this episode is probably one of the best arcs I've seen so far in this show. From the beginning and middle segments, we see how awful Rudius was bullied in his past life. Rather than being outright murdered, this is probably the worst bullying someone can go through. He is shamed, stripped, and publicly displayed for the pleasure of his tormentors. Now, I'm not too familiar with Japanese school culture, but this seems really extreme. I recall stories of 80s and 90s Japan where some really awful stuff was done by students. In the States where I live, I've never had to endure this culture, and my experience with bullying is nothing like what happened to Rudius. In Japan, according to several sources, there is a bullying problem which is widespread and institutionalized, where teachers will not report instances of bullying, or the administration will make the reports disappear. The problem goes very deep, and while this video is not about an in-depth research for it, I would recommend that you study the issue if you are interested in it. Well, those experiences have contributed in large part to how Rudius is as a person. With this setup, we get to the conclusion. Roxy forces Rudius to leave his safe space, the homestead. As we see in his flashbacks, Rudius never even took the first step towards improving himself. Even when his family tried to help him, he just refused their efforts. By forcing Rudius to confront his fears, Roxy puts him in a scenario where Rudius can see for himself that he has nothing to fear from the people of this world. It's not like the previous world. People won't torment him for fun or social status. This is a place where he can just be without worrying of being outcast. And I really like this. There might be some people who say this happened far too quickly, and while I can see your point, it's exactly what the story is saying. Sometimes it can't happen over time. Over the 20 years that Rudius was a Hiki, he never took that first step on his own. It had to happen in moments, much like how he was outcast from the home by his angry relatives. But while that was done out of anger, this was very much out of care. This one moment changed his life, his outlook on life. On another note, we also get a bit of world building here. From the location of physical areas to the magical school to evil and good demons. I generally like world building in any media, even if its ramifications aren't readily apparent, so this is a plus for me. I think I really only have two negatives in this episode. The first one is the scene with Roxy schlicking outside Paul and Zenith's room, where I just don't really understand the point of the scene. If it's to show the more of Rudius' perversity, looking in on her, we already get a good bit of it in other parts that are better placed, so this might be hammering the nail through the board rather than into it. It probably has a wider implication in the rest of the series, so if I'm wrong about this, tell me, don't spoil nothing. Secondly, the thing that's going on that's going to be a running joke throughout this series. Roxy's panties, Rudius' concept of divine treasure. To me, though I understand the concept of ecchi humor, which is just the character doing something perverted for a joke and sometimes getting punched or something like it just kind of rings hollow for me. It feels like the kind of thing you would expect out of Marvel these days, where a serious character moment happens and a character suddenly pulls out an unfunny quip, which the writers decided to pull it in. This episode has good character moments, but this one scene puts a bit of a damper on my appreciation of the arc that happens before it. If this scene was just moved before that one, it wouldn't have had the same impact, but it would just make the episode end on a much better note, at least for me. Anyway, those are my thoughts on this episode. Episode 3 of Mushoku Tensei, A Friend. We start off this episode with the scene of Roxy leaving again, then Rudius immediately looking at the panties that he stole from her. Paul tells Rudius to be kind, and that strength is for protecting the weak. Then Rudius heads off into the village, greeting the people he passes by. He comes across a group of children bullying another child, calling them a demon. Rudius pelts them with spells until they leave. He finds that the bullied is a half-elf with green hair and cleans him with heated water magic. He says his name is Sylph. Sylph asks Rudius to teach him magic through incantations, especially the warm water spell he used earlier. When he comes home, Paul asks him about his attack on the bullies, and Rudius talks back. Paul gives him the old one. No two. Rudius uses his words from earlier against him, that the strong should protect the weak, as his verbal battle experience is great. Paul talks with Zenith about Rudius and his problems with him. As summer begins, Rudius practices swordsmanship while waiting for Sylph. Sylph's been learning some magic, and Rudius shows that the hot water spell was made by combining fire and water magic. Also, apparently Sylph can do magic without incantations as well. Frolicking through the fields they go. It rains, they get stanky, so the two of them go home to bathe. Rudius strips for the bath, but Sylph seems unwilling. Despite Sylph verbally telling him no, and physically trying to stop him, Rudius forcibly strips Sylph, finding out that Sylph is female. Sylph begins to sob on the ground as Paul separates them. Paul then bathes Rudius separately and tells him that one should never force one to do anything, and tells him to apologize to Sylphie, the child's full name. Rudius apologizes, but once more, Sylphie begins to cry and doesn't accept his apology. While practicing swordplay the next day, Paul gives Rudius advice to make up and bridge the gap with Sylphie. Rudius comments on her appearance to little avail, then Sylphie apologizes to him and asks him to act normally. The episode ends with Paul worrying about what he had just taught Rudius. Now, to my thoughts on the matter. In the third episode of Mushoku Tensei, I am very conflicted about this episode. Let's talk about it as it goes. We see the running gag of panties again. Meh. We see Paul being a good father, telling his son about the right way to act. Keep this in mind for later. Rudius goes into town, unashamed of himself in front of others, like in the past, as a result of the previous episode's development. One thing I will say is that his fear of others pretty much disappears from what I've watched, which I said I was fine with the arc being so good, but I would like more aspects of his social awkwardness to be shown, rather than his perverted side constantly being brought up. Anyways, we get to see Rudius, Defender of the Week here, protecting Sylph at the moment. Sylphie asks Rudius to teach her magic. Something interesting happens. To make the hot water spell, Rudius combines water and fire spells. Now, I had this in the back of my mind throughout the episode, so I asked the nice folks over at r/sixfacedworld on Reddit about it. So, my thinking was that each spell had variables that could be edited, which is true, but I learned that each spell has a different set of variables that are just set. You can't add more. I thought that the ice spell and the hot spell were different variants of water ball, where Rudius changed the heat variable, but this was not the case. The hot water was a combination of water ball and a fire spell, and the ice spell that Sylphie cast was a different spell altogether, though ice magic is a derivative of water magic. Big thanks to r/sixfacedworld for teaching me about this. Gotta say, my favorite thing about this series so far is the magic system, which I find incredibly interesting and in-depth. Next up, we have the scene that a lot of people would consider to be the first actually uncomfortable scene that the show has to offer. More to follow. Anyways, the bath scene. It may surprise some of you, but I don't hate this scene. At least to my reckoning, it doesn't sexualize Sylphie, and doesn't treat the scene with humor that would make it feel like the show is underplaying the scene. The situation comes about as a result of Rudius' social awkwardness. It's fine. And what I like more, the scene right after. Rudius goes to apologize, and Sylphie doesn't accept. She bursts out into tears. And this, I really like. It shows that not everything could be resolved with a sorry, that there are consequences to one's actions, even if they aren't performed with an actively malicious intent. I also like Paul giving advice to Rudius and being an actually good father. He slaps Rudius and shows him having somewhat of a temper, but he also gives good advice, some of which Rudius even uses against him in their argument. The 3 times that Paul gives advice in this episode, the beginning, right after the situation, and right after Sylphie refuses his apology, he really gives good advice that respects boundaries of another person and shows Paul is a good person himself, though flawed. Prepare for a total 180 next episode. Going back to Sylphie, here comes the thing that'll reverse my praise from before. Sylphie apologizes to him. What? I expected him to make amends, but this? I liked how the previous scene showed that the actions had lasting consequences. This kind of dissolves the compliment, as everything is resolved in this one episode. While in the previous episode, the suddenness of the arc serves the arc, showing a great progress can be made in just a single step, in this episode, it just feels weirdly paced and rushed. I feel like the story would have benefited from Rudy and Sylvius being apart for a time, and gradually Rudius improving himself to gain Sylvie's forgiveness. I get that this anime wants to move the plot along, but this could have really improved this little story arc. Episode 4 Mushoku Tensei, Emergency Family Meeting. We start off this episode with Zenith revealing that she is pregnant, and then Lilia, the maid, also says she's pregnant, with Paul claiming the child. Lilia says that she plans to leave a month south, but the child will most definitely perish if that were to happen. Zenith is conflicted about this. Rudius remembers how Lilia treated him well, so he decides to interrupt in Lilia's favor. Rudius accuses Paul of forcing Lilia to copulate with him, saying that he used the power dynamic between them as master and servant to do it. Then, Rudius convinces Zenith to let Lilia stay to have another sibling. Lilia claims in her mind to have seduced Paul, but we see Paul witnessing Lilia nude and entering Lilia's room and closing the door behind them, signifying that it was his fault. Lilia had seen Rudius' lechery and assumed it was possessed, but had grown to be fine with him. We cut to both babies being born and things seemingly being back to normal. We learned that Lilia trained with Paul when they were younger and was assaulted by him, in, casual conversation. Despite everything, Rudius respects Paul and his learning swordsmanship. Paul becomes publicly as lecherous as Rudius. Almost every comment he makes is about such things. Rudius and Sylphie are out by the tree they usually visit, but when Rudius brings up leaving for school, Sylphie begins to cry. Rudius wants to groom Sylphie into his ideal woman. He gets a letter from Roxy as she is tutoring a noble in magic who is as lecherous as Rudius. Her letter also says to seek out the magic school in Renoa. Rudius brings it up with Paul, as well as Sylphie, and for bringing her with him. When Paul says he can't afford it, Rudius asks for him to find him a job to pay for it, and Paul coalesces. A carriage arrives and Ghislaine, a muscle-bound beastkin, arrives. Paul asks how Rudius would feel if he was away from Sylphie, then initiates a fight with him. The fight goes on with Rudius attempting to overcome the skill gap through magic, but Paul gains the upper hand and knocks him unconscious. When he wakes up, he's in the carriage with Ghislaine, heading to wherever his first job is, and the episode ends. Now, onto my thoughts on the matter. In the 4th episode of Mushoku Tensei, this episode really represented the culture of medieval societies, particularly the balance of power between a master and his servant, that being particularly tipped towards the master's side. Things seem to happen in this episode really fast. All of the Paul stuff is resolved in about 8 or so minutes, and I must say, the Paul in this episode feels like the polar opposite of the Paul we've gotten to know so far. From what we've seen, Paul is a pretty good father. He has a temper, he shows off for the ladies, but overall he's a good person. You know what? I could believe that he would cheat on Zenith. It seems somewhat in character at least. But after his cheating gets revealed, it seems like he talks about assaulting women every other line in just casual conversation. It feels really out of place and weird for his character. It feels like a character shift that doesn't have any build-up at all and serves only to have a person to point at and say, well, Paul did worse stuff than Rudius, so... I feel like they could have done the cheating part without the assault, and it would have been executed much better. At first I didn't like how Lilia's assault was so casually brought up, but my mind changed a bit when I considered that this represents the medieval culture at the time, where women had little to no rights, and they had no recourse to unacceptable acts against them, and no option for divorce if their partner committed such acts. At least I hope this is what the author was going for. Moving on, Paul turns from episode 4 Paul to episodes 1 through 3 Paul again, as Zenith and Lilia kick him, but then look shocked and worried that he would refuse Rudius' request. Bit strange. Then we see that the title of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation is a lie, because Rudius is going to get a job. We get introduced to Ghislaine, who is a beastkin warrior type that'll be working with Rudius. I like the character design. It's interesting to see how Paul asks if he would feel about being separated from Sylphie before the fight happens. Given Sylphie's reaction to Rudius saying he wants to leave, they definitely have somewhat of a codependent relationship by now, where Rudius is the only person Sylphie has been able to seem to care about at all. So maybe that's what Paul's thinking of. But this doesn't seem the kind of thing that episode 4 Paul would do, so who knows. The fight's animation is impressive if brief, and Rudius' desperate attempt to save himself by using magic is pretty neat, and showing that he can't overcome everything by strength alone is also cool. I guess we'll be seeing Jobful Reincarnation very soon. This chunk of episodes, 1 through 4, is pretty interesting. There's some ups and downs, some of which I'll mention here. I find the magic system incredibly interesting. The way I can relate it to some of my experience in things like coding is really cool for me, and in the functions and variables sort of way I know. The animation is really good, very fluid, and the grainy sort of filter or style they have it on is really cool. I like most of the characters. With their design, each character feels like an individual that I could point out of an audience. I think there are some issues with pacing that impact the story development and character development though, as a lot of story points seem to be very quickly resolved and carried out, usually over the course of an episode or even half an episode. This can make it seem like problems the characters are facing don't particularly matter when it's done in a bad way. However, when it's done in a good way, like episode 2's agoraphobia arc, it can still be very impactful. I really don't get the shift in Paul's character though. I'd say from most liked to least liked episodes, I would go 2, 1, 3, 4. Maybe at the end of the season I'll rank all the episodes, but this is how I'm feeling for now. Well, those were the first 4 episodes of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. This took so long to write, record, and edit, so I'm gonna beg you to like, comment, subscribe, and maybe enjoy some of my other content. Thank you very much. What did you think? Did you enjoy these episodes? Am I a heartless, stubborn, and idiotic critic? Leave your comments below. Gotta say, the time between watching these has really helped me process how I feel about these episodes, in both the good and the bad. Well, however you feel, thank you for watching this Toreview, and I'll see you later.